Hello everyone, DonTheCrown here, and the 2.0 PTR for Diablo 4 is now live, and I want to do a quick video talking specifically about the Sorcerer, and kind of the updates for Sorcerer and the new things that we got. And I gotta say, overall, I'm less than impressed right now with what we're getting. It kind of feels like a lot of the stuff is not super duper great. Let's go over it real quick. So, like every class, we got a new main skill, and we got a new key passive. We also have a whole bunch of different changes in the passives in terms of like how things are, able to be pathed, and some additional new passives. Like cooldown here is really great. This one here gives you about like 3% more damage per skill on your bar that matches your main skill, which seems okay. Some of these connections over here are like, kind of weird, I think. Like pathing to these don't really make sense to me. Like if you are going to take Meteor, getting this little shortcut here to Devouring Blaze, you're always going to take Inner Flames anyways, so you're never going to want to bypass this. So this doesn't really actually add anything. It just kind of gives you these options that, aren't really super duper great. They did add some more stuff up here though as well, or like broke up some things. So the maximum mana thing no longer leads to elemental dominance. And then down here we have like generating a barrier, which goes up to 30% of our life. And that doesn't seem to actually work right now. As you can see here, I'm chilling at 120 barrier with 3,000 some life. So this should be about a 1,000 barrier. So that's not working at all. And then this one gives us a little bit of DR while we have barrier, which is pretty common. But let's talk specifically about, we also Mana Shield is no longer like after aligning the elements. Let's talk about Familiar. So Familiar is pretty bad. Basically is a conjuration skill that summons up a little minion that is matching to the element of the spell you cast recently. And if you go to Enhance Familiar, it makes it so that Familiars apply effects around them every 1 second according to their element. So it has a little fire burning aura for like every 1 second it applies, or a chill, or a stun. And then you can go down here and make it so that if you have an active familiar, you deal 10% increased damage of its type. Or you can go up here and make it so that the familiars now always go on a sequence of fire, cold, lightning, fire. And while you have at least 2 different familiars active, you get a little bit of DR. So this allows you to kind of like get all of the familiars out if you want. But it's generally, I think they're kind of just bad. Because if I'm playing a fire build, I don't really need more burning for the most part. Yes, I do get a little bit of, damage boost here, maybe 4%, but that's not really all that great. And the damage these things do isn't really much to write home about. So you can see here, it takes a while for it to even attack. It kind of looks like chilling in the air, and its burn actually is doing more damage per second, is the 3,000 number versus the very small about 500 damage number that is popping off when it hits. And then of course it'll do different elements here. So I do cold, it just hits for about 500. If I switch to lightning, it's gonna do even less than that. So like it doesn't really feel like it does a lot of damage at all. If anything, it feels like it does like no damage. Baseline, because like my incinerate right now, for example, can tick quite high if I have everything up and going. So yeah, I mean, we got this up to like million plus ticks. So like having a skill that barely hits or does any damage at all feels pretty bad. Now it does have one good thing that I think is kind of a bug, and that is they have changed how Rosh's iridescent loop. And this thing is really annoying to deal with now. So casting a pyromancy, shock, or frost skill increases your damage. Basically, as opposed to doing damage, now you have to cast a skill. And casting again refreshes all of the bonuses, but only if the previous skill was a different element. So normally if you're going around incinerating, you're going to stack up the buff. And you need to do stuff like teleport or drop out your ice blades in order to keep this up. But it kind of really relies on your cooldowns. The good thing about Familiar is Familiar counts as all 3. So you can pretty easily keep up your stack, or start your stack at least. As you saw there, it counted as fire. And so it didn't give me a stack because it was incinerate. And so as long as I have no stacks, it just gives me 3 right out the gate. Now I can't cast Familiar again to keep the stack going. And if I cast fire and then do it again, sometimes it'll give me 3 stacks, Sometimes it'll just give me 1. So overall, not super duper impressive, the familiar. Now we also got some other aspects here we'll talk about real quick. So we have this one here, the Ring of Elemental Constellation. This makes it so you cast a Pyro Shock or Frost skill. It conjures matching elemental dagger around you that pierces through enemies, dealing damage after 3 seconds. And the damage is increased by 100% per matching elemental skill you cast. Now, unfortunately, this doesn't really seem to do much. You can kind of see like a little thing behind me here. And like, yes, it does hit harder than the familiar does. But if I spam a whole bunch of spells here, you see it's only really hitting for like 3,000. So realistically, this aspect is better than a familiar. But still, I don't really know why you would want to use this. It doesn't seem to hit very hard, even if you're like kind of spamming spells, not hitting really hard. I don't know if I cast familiar. Oh yeah. Also, it's kind of hard to see in the first place, especially with all the other damage stuff going on. If I cast familiar, I get all 3. That's kind of interesting. But yeah, this aspect kind of feels undercooked in general. Now, the other aspect I get messed around with here is the overheating aspect. So this makes it so that after channeling Incinerate for 2 seconds, it deals critical fire damage per second for 5 seconds. And casting Incinerate refreshes and maintains this bonus. So what happens here is as you cast Incinerate, after 2 seconds, you'll get a green bar above this. And this doesn't make you do damage around you or anything. This makes it so that if you hit an enemy with Incinerate, they can kind of pop off here with these like little crit hits. And this does redo the duration of the buff as long as you're channeling. And so I don't really think that this is intended to make it work this way, but regardless, like hitting for 2,000 damage isn't really all that impressive. And it does this like weird number hyper overlap here once you kind of go into melee. As you can see, my numbers, aren't really hitting all that high, especially in comparison to like the main Incinerate here. And Incinerate itself seems to be, I don't know, not really hitting as hard as I was expecting it to. It seems to be doing something weird with like maybe snapshotting vulnerable. So yeah, not really pleased about this. And then lastly, we have the new key passive here. So the key passive, it gives you 1 stack of enlightenment or 15 stacks if your previous cast was a different element. After gaining 100 stacks, you become enlightened, but you can no longer gain stacks and you lose 10 of them a second. And so you have to build up, and this takes you about 7 casts of alternating elements to get the enlightenment buff, and it just gives you 25% more damage, mana regeneration, and attack speed. And realistically, compared to like Veer's Mastery, where you're getting 25% damage all of the time, you're getting damage reduction, this is just way better. The only thing this really has is like a little bit of attack speed sometimes, but you don't have the attack speed when you're building up stacks, which is when you want it the most. And so this really feels like it's an on-off type of thing, and it seems like it'd be pretty hard to maintain. Now, if I cast Familiar here, I get 15 stacks. If I cast Familiar again, I get 1 stack. And if I cast a fire spell, I still only get 1 stack. Oh, and Familiar only counts as 1 stack there. Now, if I alternate between all my spells here, I can kind of get it going. But there you go. As you can see how quickly this thing just runs out. I'm enlightened during this time. I'm getting a little bit of a damage buff. But comparing this to like using almost anything else, it does seem pretty bad. So I'm not really sure that I would want to use this, especially because you kind of need to go and spam a whole bunch of different stuff. As you can see here, while I'm channeling, the enlightenment isn't even going up. So like maybe tapping a channeled skill might be the play to go here, but realistically not very good. Now, next up, let's talk about Paragon boards real quick. We talked about this particular glyph in a previous video, and I do think that this is really cool. So Eliminator gives you bonus to all normal nodes within range. And so right now, as you can see, this glyph is giving me 108 extra bonus intelligence, thanks to just, having a lot of intelligence and range. And I can pick up like dexterity, and it's going to give me 14 dexterity. And so this glyph right now is only level 26. Pretty easy to level up your glyphs to at least 15 very, very quickly. And so getting up to 26 here is pretty easy as well. And so just able to get quite a bit of damage from the intelligence. Now, one thing to note, I'm probably have to do a whole separate video about this as well, but they changed the damage formula on intelligence again, and they doubled the amount of damage you get. So as you can see right now, I have 2,238 intelligence, but it's giving me a whopping 559.6. And that's because every 4 intelligence is giving me a skill damage. And that is just absolutely ludicrous, way too much. And as you can see, I already have 2,200 intelligence. The new gems are going to give you up to 150 intelligence per gem. And so if you like forego going through runes at all, it's going to be quite a bit of damage just coming from your gems. And if you're like looking at ancestral pieces here, you get up to 121 intelligence baseline, which means it's going to be like 180 something. If it's GA'd, you can masterwork that up as well. And the intelligence and just main stat stuff is going to get crazy. I believe this is going to get very, very high, like 600 some intelligence just from this glyph alone, which is a pretty big damage buff. Now, the other glyphs I'm not super pleased about right now. Now, some of them are probably bugged. So, for example, Pyromaniac here has cold damage as is legendary. So when you get up to level 46 on a glyph, it'll now also have a legendary bonus as well. And for some reason, Pyromaniac has cold damage right now, which makes no sense. And then let's go through all of the ones that I kind of think are a little bit weird. So first off, Exploit. I still really think that it's rather difficult on Sorc to get vulnerable on it. And this is like one of the only exploit glyphs in the game that doesn't give you vulnerable on hit. A lot of other classes have vulnerable on hit from their exploit glyph. I don't really know why Sorcerer doesn't get the same treatment. Let's see here. Control has damage to crowd controlled, which I kind of thought was fitting for this particular glyph as this legendary thing, 15%, but there's some other ones that also have it. Adept, for example, has some really good multiplier of increasing your mastery skill damage. This is very much just like, you want mastery skill damage, this is going to give you more mastery skill damage, more mastery skill area, and then more mastery skill damage as well. Just very, very good, very much in line with everything. You have lightning skill damage here, and then Flame Feeder has one of the worst legendary modifiers I can possibly imagine. This is almost unusable, I think, for the most part, because it only gives you 15% multiplier to healthy enemies, and healthy enemies have more than 80% of their life. So this is like 1/5 of the value. So this is a 3% multiplier compared to a lot of these other ones that have like 10% multiplier. Damage to healthy really shouldn't be on here at all. Maybe if it was damage to healthy and damage to injured, and then having a bigger multiplier would be maybe okay. But I just think that this is very, very silly. Maybe this should just be fire damage instead. Likewise here, Imbiber does have damage while you're healthy. I think that this is cool. I think this is very neat. But Imbiber, I don't think I've ever seen anyone ever recommend, because who wants 30% increased potion healing? And then the base part is just damage while you're healthy. This is just bad and needs to be redone because you're not going to be using as many glyphs. And then this one here, really good. Conjuration damage, increased damage to healthy enemies once again. So we have 2 fire-based glyphs that both have increased damage to healthy enemies, which is horrible. Torch itself is pretty bad. And even in an incinerate build, nobody ever takes this because increased damage per nearby burning enemy is great right up until you get to the boss, where it doesn't do anything for you. You need 5 enemies nearby to cap out the additional bonus. And it's not like really like it's even a huge number of a bonus here. It's not like 20% or something. And so against the boss, you get zilch. Basically, you just get 2.5%. pretty bad. And then increased damage to healthy puts this like an F tier of glyphs, basically. I guess F tier is probably Imbiber. And then Unleash just has regular increased damage, which is nice. We have non-physical damage. We have more damage to crowd control. And I don't really feel like this particular glyph is all that great in the first place. Whenever you chill or freeze an enemy, you get damage up to 18%. So you can get this against single targets, but not against bosses at all. And so I just think Winter overall is just kind of a bad glyph. Charged, you're also getting 10% lightning damage. You're getting 15% concentration damage here, 15% critical strike damage. These are all multipliers. 10% non-physical, 10% damage, 10% cold damage, and then 10% cold damage, and then 14% increased damage to close enemies. And I kind of think that this one here is kind of strange. Goes Tactician gives you increased damage to close, but then if we look at Territorial, we get increased damage to vulnerable. And I feel like these should be flipped around because Territorial is all about being close, and there's like very few times, very few builds where you actually want to intentionally be close to enemies. And you know, Tactician doesn't really, like, it's more of like a one size fits all. Lots of builds are going to want Tactician, and so it doesn't make sense to slap a modifier on there that like only Incinerate is going to use, which I think is a little bit crazy. Now, besides that, the new board is pretty cool. Fundamental Release gives you, every time you apply Vulnerable, Burning, or Critically Strike an enemy, they take 10% increased damage from you, up to 30%. That's a pretty nice multiplier. This has good stuff like damage while burning. You have damage reduction from burning over here. You have damage reduction from vulnerable over here. Then we have damage taken over time reduction. So all of this whole board is very, very nice. It has a lot of good stats on it. Non-physical damage, vulnerable damage, and overall just very nice board here. I'm probably going to end up putting Tactician in here. I level this character up from level 1. I'm going to do a whole video talking about my specific thoughts on the progression, but that's going to give my thoughts on Sorcerer right now. It does kind of feel like at Torment 3 right now, though, that I'm kind of falling off in terms of damage. I even like went out and crafted myself a Tyrael's Might and a Harlequin Crest. Without masterworking, I kind of feel like I'm going to struggle to get into Torment 4, even with keeping Tal Rashes up. I did note, by the way, that having a Harlequin Crest did make the cooldown situation on with the Tal Rashes a little bit easier to deal with, especially if I'm like managing familiar. But I can't stress enough how unfun Tal Rashes has become. So Tal Rashes before used to be like you just get damage for doing the things you're already doing. But Tal Rashes now makes me feel like I'm jumping through hoop to keep this buff up. And as I'm like going into combat and doing stuff, I have to like kind of always be keeping an eye on this buff down here, making sure that I'm popping my cooldowns at the right time, making sure I'm trying to keep familiars up or something. And especially like I didn't get a proc just now because the familiar, I guess, was counting as lightning. Now sometimes you just drop your stacks and suddenly you're doing a whole lot less damage, and it feels pretty bad. And I do wish that these things applied something other than chill or stun. I do think that these are pretty bad. Like some way to apply vulnerable would be really great, and familiar would be really cool if it didn't match the element that you just recently did. Because if I'm already fire, I don't need more burning. If I'm doing cold, I don't need more chill. If I'm doing lightning, like all the lightning skills basically stun. So it's giving me more of the things that I already have, and it's not giving me stuff that I don't have. And the biggest problem for me is that I think that if you're playing any build that's not a dot build, you're going to be running Firebolt enchantment because this applies a burn from direct damage. And familiar would be a really good way to make it so that, you know, you could put a different enchantment in, and familiar would help you do the burning, but it's not doing that right now. So if that like fire aura that it has was instead applied to you, that would be really great, assuming you're not playing a fire build. Now, one small thing aside is that the Fireball build actually got quite a big buff this season, because now you're going to get burn directly on Enhanced Fireball, which makes it so you don't need Firebolt anymore in the build. And then on top of that, Destructive Fireball was additive before, so it's giving you a flat 20% critical strike damage, increased up to 30%, again hitting 3 enemies, and now it's just a 20% more damage multiplier against single targets. So Fireball is going to be a lot better than it was before, but yeah, that's pretty much my thoughts on all of the stuff. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Sorc right now definitely needs some help, so please give some feedback to the devs. Thank you.